Daniel Cole walked through the narrow hallways of the ship. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. In his hands, he carried a bag of tools that he had used 1,000 times before. The bag was old and worn, just like his uniform. But Daniel did not care about how things looked. He only cared about how things worked. He had been on this ship for 6 years. The ship was called Horizon's Edge, and it was a diplomatic vessel. Important aliens came and went through its halls every day. They talked about trade deals and peace agreements. They wore beautiful clothes and spoke in languages that Daniel did not understand. And not one of them had ever learned his name. To the aliens, Daniel was invisible. He was just the human who fixed broken pipes and replaced burned-out lights. When the heating system failed in the middle of the night, they called for him. When the water recyclers made strange noises, they sent for him. But when the work was done, they looked right through him as if he was not there at all. Daniel had grown used to this treatment. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Concordance. They had only been part of it for 30 years. To the older species, that was nothing. Some of them had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans learned to make fire. The Volanthi were one of these ancient species. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like glass. Light moved through their bodies like water through a crystal. They lived for hundreds of years and considered themselves the most advanced beings in the galaxy. When a Volanthi walked down a hallway, everyone else moved aside. Even the other aliens showed them respect. Daniel did not hate the Volanthi. He did not hate anyone. He simply did his job and stayed out of the way. That was the best thing a human could do on a ship full of important aliens. But everything changed when Princess Sireth decided to travel on their ship. The news came during a morning meeting. Captain Laura Bennett stood at the front of the room with a look on her face that Daniel had never seen before. She was worried. More than worried. She was scared. "The Volanthi Crown Princess will be our guest for the next 2 weeks," the captain said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "She will travel with us to Ethon Prime for a diplomatic conference. I do not need to tell you how important this is. Any mistake, any problem, any small issue could damage relations between humans and Volanthi for generations." The room was silent. Daniel stood at the back, near the door, where he always stood during these meetings. He listened to the captain explain the new rules. No one was to approach the princess without permission. No one was to speak to her unless she spoke first. Her guards would have full authority on the ship. Daniel looked around at his fellow crew members. They all wore the same expression, fear mixed with excitement. This was the biggest thing that had ever happened on their ship. Everyone wanted to make a good impression. Everyone except Daniel. He just wanted to finish his work and get some sleep. There was a problem with the cooling system in Section 7 that had been bothering him for days. Princess or no princess, that system needed to be fixed. The princess arrived the next morning with 50 guards and 20 servants. Daniel watched from a distance as she walked onto the ship. She was the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Her skin glowed with soft blue light, and her eyes held the brightness of distant stars. She moved like water flowing downhill, smooth and graceful and completely natural. She did not look at any of the humans. Not even once. The guards spread through the ship like water filling a container. They checked every room, every closet, every maintenance shaft. One of them found Daniel in the engine room, surrounded by wires and tools. "What are you doing here?" the guard demanded. He was Volanthi, tall and strong, with skin that glowed an angry red. "I work here," Daniel said calmly. "I am the maintenance technician." The guard looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Daniel went back to work. The days that followed were strange and difficult. The ship felt different with the princess aboard. People walked more carefully. They spoke more quietly. They checked their uniforms 3 times before leaving their rooms. Daniel continued his work, as always. He crawled through maintenance shafts that no one else knew about. He fixed problems that no one else could find. He kept the ship running while everyone else worried about impressing the princess. Late one night, he was working on a power junction in one of the lower decks. The hallway was dark and quiet. Everyone else was asleep or attending to the princess in her chambers above. Daniel heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw a young Volante woman standing in the shadows. She was not a guard. Her skin glowed with soft purple light, and she wore the simple clothes of a servant. "You are the human who fixes things," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Daniel replied. The woman studied him with curious eyes. "I have heard about you. The other servants talk. They say you know this ship better than anyone. They say you can fix anything." Daniel shrugged. "I have been here a long time, but you are just a human." The woman said this without cruelty. She was simply stating what she believed to be true. Humans are young. Your species learned to fly only a short time ago. How can you understand machines that are older than your entire civilization? Daniel thought about this question for a moment. He could have been angry. Many humans would have been. But Daniel had heard this kind of talk before. He had heard it his entire life. "Machines do not care who built them," he said finally. "They do not care if you're old or young, Volante or human. They only care about one thing. Do you understand how they work? If you do, they will serve you. If you do not, they will break down and leave you in the dark." The woman looked at him with new interest. "That is a strange way to think." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But it is true." He turned back to his work. The woman watched him for a while longer, then walked away into the darkness. Daniel did not think about her again. He had too much work to do. He did not know that in just a few days, everything he believed about his place in the universe would change. He did not know that the princess herself would seek him out. He did not know that the galaxy was about to learn what humans were truly capable of. For now, he was just Daniel Cole, the maintenance technician, the man who fixed things while everyone else looked the other way. But even the smallest spark can start a fire that lights up the stars. The attack came without warning. Daniel was deep inside a maintenance shaft, replacing a worn cable that had been making strange noises for weeks. The shaft was narrow and dark. The only light came from the small lamp attached to his helmet. His hands worked quickly, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this job 1,000 times. Then the lights went out. For a moment, Daniel thought it was just a local failure. These things happened on old ships. A circuit would overload, a fuse would blow, and then the backup systems would kick in. He waited in the darkness, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The backup lights did not come on. Daniel felt the ship shake beneath him. It was a hard shake, the kind that came from an explosion or a collision. Alarms started screaming through the metal walls. Red emergency lights flickered to life, painting everything in the color of blood. Something was very wrong. Daniel pulled himself out of the shaft and ran toward the engine room. The corridors were filled with chaos. Crew members rushed past him, their faces white with fear. He heard shouting in a dozen different languages. The Volante guards were moving toward the princess's chambers, their weapons drawn. But Daniel did not care about the princess. He cared about the ship. If the engine room failed, everyone would die. He burst through the doors and found his 2 fellow technicians already there. Greg Morris was at the main console, his fingers flying across the controls. Katie Lane was on her knees next to a smoking power unit, trying to stop a fire with an extinguisher. What happened? Daniel demanded. The main power coupling exploded, Greg said. His voice was shaking. All primary systems are down. Shields are failing. We have maybe 15 minutes before we are completely defenseless. Through the small viewport in the corner of the room, Daniel could see them. 3 ships, dark and angular, moving toward them like sharks toward wounded prey. They were Draft Syndicate vessels, pirates, criminals, the worst kind of people in the galaxy. They knew we were carrying the princess, Katie said. Her face was covered in smoke and sweat. This was planned. They sabotaged our systems before they attacked. Daniel's mind was already working. He looked at the damaged systems, at the sparking wires, at the dying power readings on the screens. The official repair manual would say this damage was too severe. It would say they needed to dock at a station for proper repairs. It would say there was nothing they could do. But Daniel had not learned from official manuals. He had learned from the ship itself. He had spent 6 years crawling through its guts, learning its secrets, understanding how every piece connected to every other piece. He knew things about this ship that its original builders had forgotten. "Greg," he said, his voice suddenly calm and steady. "Reroute auxiliary power through the secondary conduits. Use pathways 7 through 12. Greg stared at him. Those pathways are not designed for this kind of load. They could overload and explode. They will hold. Trust me. Katie, I need you to manually start the backup fusion cells. All 4 of them at once." Katie's eyes went wide. "The safety protocols will not allow that. If I bypass them and something goes wrong, the whole ship could be destroyed. Nothing will go wrong. Do it now." The 2 technicians looked at each other. They had known Daniel for years. He was quiet. He was modest. He never gave orders or raised his voice. But there was something different about him now. Something in his eyes that they had never seen before. They moved. Daniel climbed into the central power housing. It was hot inside, and the air smelled like burned plastic. His hands found the connections in the darkness. He could not see them, but he did not need to. He knew where everything was. He had memorized every wire, every junction, every pathway. He started connecting things that were never meant to be connected. The ship's engineers had built walls between different systems. They had created separations and barriers to prevent accidents. These were good ideas in normal times. But these were not normal times. Daniel tore down the walls. Power began to flow through new pathways. The ship's computer tried to stop him, flashing warning messages on every screen. He ignored them. The backup fusion cells came online, adding their strength to the weakening grid. The secondary conduits carried loads they had never carried before. And slowly, impossibly, the lights came back on. The shields flickered and then grew strong again. The weapons systems, which had been cold and dead, began to hum with new power. The draft ships fired at them, and their shots splashed harmlessly against the renewed barriers. But Daniel was not finished. He reached deeper into the ship systems, finding connections that even he had never tested before. The Horizon's Edge was not a warship. It had basic defensive weapons, nothing more. But Daniel saw possibilities that no one else could see. He linked the navigation sensors to the shield harmonics. He connected the communication array to the weapon targeting systems. He created a web of information that flowed through the entire ship, making it think faster and react quicker than any vessel of its kind had ever done before. The draft ships fired again. But this time, the shields predicted where the shots would land. They shifted and adapted, becoming stronger in the places where they were needed most. The enemy captains had never seen anything like it. Their attacks, which should have torn through the diplomatic vessel in minutes, were doing nothing. In the command center, Captain Bennett watched her displays with her mouth hanging open. The ship was doing things that should not have been possible. It was moving and fighting like a trained warrior, not a peaceful transport. Who is doing this? She demanded. How are we still alive? The answer came through the intercom. It was Daniel's voice, tired but calm. Just a maintenance tech, Captain. The shield should hold now. Let me know if you need anything else. The Drath commanders looked at each other through their communication screens. They had expected an easy target. They had expected to capture a princess and become rich. Instead, they had found something that they could not understand. They turned their ships and ran Dot in the engine room. Daniel climbed out of the power housing. His hands were burned and his uniform was soaked with sweat. Greg and Katie stood nearby, staring at him like he had just grown a second head. How did you do that? Katie whispered. That should not have been possible. Daniel looked at the systems he had created. They were still running, still working, still keeping everyone alive. He had built something new tonight, something that had never existed before. I just know how things fit together, he said quietly. That is all. He walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at them. I need some rest. Make sure no one touches those connections while I am gone. They are holding us together. Then he walked away, leaving Greg and Katie alone in the engine room with a ship that had become something more than it was before dawn above them. In her royal chambers, Princess Sirith sat in silence. Her guards had told her everything. A human had saved them. Not a warrior or a general or a scientist. A maintenance worker. A man who fixed broken pipes and replaced burned-out lights. She had lived for 400 years. She had thought she understood the universe and all its people. She was beginning to realize that she understood nothing at all. Daniel was eating breakfast alone in the small crew kitchen when the messenger found him. It was a Volanthi servant, a young male with skin that glowed pale green. He stood in the doorway and stared at Daniel like he was looking at something impossible. The princess wishes to see you, the servant said. His voice was filled with confusion. She has summoned you to her chambers. Daniel put down his spoon. The porridge in his bowl was getting cold, but he did not care about food anymore. Humans were not summoned by Volanthi royalty. This simply did not happen. In all the years since the two species had met, no Volanthi princess had ever asked to speak with a human worker. Now? Daniel asked. Now? Daniel looked down at himself. His uniform was wrinkled from sleeping in a chair. There was still grease on his hands from last night's repairs. He had not showered or shaved in 2 days. Should I change into something more appropriate? The servant shook his head slowly. She said to bring you as you are. She said. He paused, as if the words did not make sense to him. She said she wants to see the real you. Daniel stood up and followed the servant through the ship. The corridors were quiet now. Most of the crew was resting after the chaos of the attack. But Daniel could feel eyes on him as he walked. People were watching from doorways and corners. They had heard about what he had done. They did not understand it any more than he did. The princess's chambers were on the upper deck, behind thick doors guarded by 4 Volanthi warriors. The guards looked at Daniel with barely hidden disgust. A human, dressed like a laborer, walking into the presence of their future queen. It was wrong. It was insulting. But they had their orders. They stepped aside and let him pass. The chamber inside was beautiful beyond anything Daniel had ever seen. The walls were covered with flowing patterns of light that moved like living things. The furniture looked like it was made from liquid crystal, solid and transparent at the same time. And in the center of it all sat Princess Sirith, glowing with the soft blue light of her species. She was alone. Daniel stopped at a respectful distance and waited. He did not know the proper way to greet Volanthi royalty. He did not know if he should bow or kneel or speak or stay silent. So he simply stood there, his hands at his sides, and waited for her to tell him what to do. The princess studied him for a long time. Her eyes moved across his face, his hands, his worn uniform. She was looking for something. Daniel did not know what. "You saved this vessel," she said finally. Her voice was like music, each word carrying subtle tones that seemed to hang in the air. "You saved everyone aboard." "Including me. I was just doing my job," Daniel replied. "No." The princess shook her head slowly. "What you did was not your job. Your job is to replace filters and repair broken systems. What you did last night was something else entirely. My engineers examined your modifications this morning. They spent 4 hours trying to understand what you created. They failed." Daniel said nothing. He did not know what to say. "They tell me you connected systems that were never designed to work together," Sirith continued. "They tell me you built pathways through the ship that should not exist. They tell me you turned a diplomatic transport into something that could fight like a warship. And you did all of this in minutes, in the dark, while the ship was under attack." She leaned forward in her chair, and her blue light grew brighter. "How is this possible? You are a maintenance technician. You are human. Your species has only been traveling between stars for a single generation. How can you understand machines better than beings who have been building them for thousands of years?" Daniel thought about her question. He had asked himself the same thing many times over the years. Why could he see things that others could not? Why did machines seem to speak to him in ways they did not speak to anyone else? "I do not know how to explain it," he said slowly. "I have always been this way. When I look at a system, I do not just see the parts. I see how the parts want to connect. I see the paths that exist but have never been used. I see possibilities that no one ever thought about." "But you are just a maintenance worker," Sirith said. "If you have these abilities, why do you spend your life fixing broken pipes?" "Because someone has to," Daniel said simply. "Because the work needs to be done. Because I am useful here." The princess stared at him as if she was seeing a human for the first time in her long life. And in a way, she was. "I have lived for 400 years, she said quietly. "I have met leaders and warriors and the greatest minds of a dozen species. I thought I understood power. I thought it lived in armies and weapons and political influence." She stood up from her chair and walked toward Daniel. Her movements were slow and graceful, like a dancer moving through water. "But you have shown me something different. You have no army. You have no weapons. You have no title or authority. And yet, when death came for us all, you were the one who stopped it. You, alone, in the dark, with nothing but your knowledge and your hands." She stopped just a few feet away from him. This close, he could feel the warmth of her light on his skin. "What are you?" she asked. "What are humans, really?" Daniel met her eyes. He thought about his species. He thought about all the humans who worked in shadows, keeping things running, building and fixing and creating without asking for recognition. He thought about the teachers and the farmers and the engineers and the doctors. The ordinary people who did extraordinary things every single day. "We are survivors," he said. "That is what we are. For thousands of years, we lived on a single planet. We had no natural weapons, no claws, no armor. We were small and weak compared to the predators around us. But we survived. We learned to use tools. We learned to work together. We learned to solve problems that seemed impossible." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Your people look at us and see a young species. You see children taking their first steps among the stars. But what you do not see is the millions of years that came before. The struggles, the failures, the times when we nearly destroyed ourselves and somehow found a way to keep going." The princess was silent, listening. "There are millions of humans like me," Daniel continued. "People who work quietly, who fix what is broken, who keep things running while others take the credit. We do not ask for recognition. We do not need it. We just do what needs to be done. That is who we are. That is what makes us human. Sirith looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that made her servants gasp in shock. She bowed to him. It was a small bow, the kind that Valanthi royalty reserved for equals, for beings they considered worthy of respect. I think, she said softly, that my people have made a terrible mistake. We have looked at humanity and seen only what we expected to see. We have not seen the truth. She straightened and looked Daniel directly in the eyes. Thank you, Daniel Cole, not just for saving my life, but for showing me what I was too blind to see. Daniel did not know how to respond to this. No one had ever thanked him before. Not like this. I should get back to work, he said finally. The modifications I made last night need to be stabilized. Without proper maintenance, they could fail. The princess smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible on her alien face, but it was real. Then go, she said. Do your work. But know this, things will be different after today. For you, and for all of humanity. Daniel bowed his head slightly, then turned and walked away. Behind him, he could hear the servants whispering in voices filled with wonder and confusion. He did not care about any of that. He had work to do. But somewhere deep inside, something had changed. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone had truly seen him, and that feeling was worth more than all the titles in the galaxy. The peace lasted for 3 days. Daniel spent the time stabilizing his modifications and training Greg and Katie to maintain them. The ship was running better than it ever had before. Power flowed smoothly through the new pathways he had created. The shields were stronger, the sensors were sharper, and even the life support systems seemed to breathe more easily. But Daniel knew it would not last. The Draft Syndicate did not accept failure. They had tried once and lost. They would try again. He was in the communication room when the sensors detected them. Not 3 ships this time. 12. The alarm cut through the ship like a knife. Daniel watched the display screen as the enemy vessels appeared one by one, dropping out of hyperspace in a circle around them. It was a perfect trap. There was nowhere to run. Captain Bennett's voice came through the intercom, calm but tight with fear. All crew to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Daniel ran to the command center. The captain was standing at her console, staring at the tactical display with hollow eyes. 12 warships surrounded them. Each one was twice the size of the horizon's edge. Each one carried enough weapons to destroy them 100 times over. They are not moving, the tactical officer said. His name was Chris Parker, and his hands were shaking as he worked his controls. They are just sitting there, waiting. A face appeared on the main screen. It was a Drath commander, his gray skin scarred from a lifetime of violence. His name was Vexith, and he was one of the most wanted criminals in the Concordance. Daniel had read about him in the ship's information archives. He had killed thousands of people over his long career. This is Commander Vex of the Drath Syndicate, the face said. His voice was cold and empty, like wind blowing through a dead forest. You have something that belongs to us. The princess. Surrender her, and we will let the rest of you leave alive. Resist, and we will destroy your ship piece by piece. You have 10 minutes to decide. The screen went dark. Captain Bennett turned to look at her officers. They were all staring at the tactical display, counting the ships, calculating the odds. The answer was simple. There was no hope. They could not fight. They could not run. They could only die or surrender. How long can our shields hold? The captain asked. Chris checked his readings. Against that much firepower? Maybe 10 minutes. 15 if we are lucky. And weapons? We have the modifications Cole made. But we are still just a transport ship. We cannot fight 12 warships. The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. This was the end. All they could do now was choose how to face it. Daniel was thinking something else. He had spent the past 3 days doing more than just stabilizing his modifications. He had been preparing, learning, planning for exactly this moment. The first attack had taught him something important. The Drath did not just want the princess. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to show the galaxy that no one was safe from them. But Daniel could send a message too. "Captain," he said quietly, "I need access to the communication array." Bennett turned to look at him. Her eyes were tired and defeated. "Cole, this is not the time for I can end this," Daniel said. "But I need you to trust me." The captain stared at him. She was a good officer. She had served in the fleet for 20 years. Every lesson she had ever learned told her to handle this herself, to negotiate or fight or find a dignified way to face death. But she had seen what Daniel could do. She had watched her ship come alive under his hands. She had heard the reports from her engineers, their voices filled with wonder and confusion. "Do it," she said. Daniel ran. The communication array was deep in the heart of the ship, in a room that most crew members did not even know existed. It was supposed to be just a relay station, a place where messages came in and went out. But Daniel had discovered long ago that it was much more than that. The Galactic Concordance used a shared network for all communications. Every ship, every station, every planet was connected through special relays that allowed instant contact across any distance. The system was considered unbreakable. The encryption protecting it would take a normal computer millions of years to solve. Daniel did not try to break it. He had a different approach. In his 6 years on the ship, he had watched millions of messages pass through the communication system. Most people ignored this traffic. It was just noise, a constant stream of data flowing through the network. But Daniel paid attention. He noticed patterns. He saw connections. He had learned things that the Drath Syndicate thought were secret. His fingers moved across the controls. He was not hacking into the network. He was using the emergency access protocols that the original designers had built into the system. Backdoors meant for crisis situations. Pathways that most people did not know existed. Daniel began to broadcast. His message went out to every Concordance vessel within range. It contained the location of the horizon's edge and a record of the Drath attack. But that was not the important part. The important part was the data he had collected over 6 years of quiet observation. The Drath Syndicate's secret bank accounts, the locations of their hidden bases, the names of the corrupt officials they had paid for protection, the details of every deal they had made. He gave it all away. The response was immediate. On the Drath command ship, alarms began to sound. Vexith received a message from his superiors, their voices filled with panic and rage. The Syndicate's entire operation was suddenly exposed. Every investigator, every bounty hunter, every law enforcement agency in the Concordance now had access to their secrets. The mission was over. Capturing the princes no longer mattered. All that mattered now was running, hiding, trying to save what little they could from the disaster. On the bridge of his flagship, Vexith stared at his displays in disbelief. He had been beaten, not by weapons or warriors, but by a single human who had been watching and learning in silence for years. "Retreat," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "All ships retreat." 12 warships turned and fled into the darkness of space. In the command center of the horizon's edge, Captain Bennett watched them go. Her officers were silent, unable to understand what had just happened. They had been seconds away from death. Now their enemies were running away, and no one had fired a single shot. The intercom crackled. It was Daniel's voice, tired and quiet. "They will not come back," he said. "I made sure of that." The captain found her voice. "Cole, what did you do?" There was a pause before he answered. I showed them that humans are not as weak as they thought. I showed them that even the smallest person can bring down the mightiest enemy. All you need is patience and knowledge and the will to use them. Another pause. I am going to rest now, Captain. It has been a long day. The communication ended. The bridge was silent. Chris Parker was the first to speak. Did he just defeat an entire crime syndicate with a communication array? No one answered. No one knew what to say. In her chambers, Princess Sirith sat in the glow of her own light and thought about what she had witnessed. She had seen armies clash and empires fall. She had seen the greatest powers in the galaxy rise and crumble. But she had never seen anything like Daniel Cole, a human, a maintenance worker, a man who had been invisible to everyone around him. And yet, when the moment came, he had saved them all. She was beginning to understand something that her people had never understood before. Humans were not a young species. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. And survivors knew how to win. The Horizon's Edge arrived at Ethon Prime without further incident. The great station hung in space like a jewel made of light and metal, home to diplomats and traders from 100 different species. Ships came and went through its ports every minute of every day. But today was different. Today, word had spread. The story of what happened during the voyage had traveled faster than the ship itself. Every news channel in the Concordance was talking about it. The Drath Syndicate attack. The mysterious human who had saved the princess. The secrets that had been revealed to the galaxy. Daniel tried to avoid the attention. He stayed in the engine room while the ship docked. He planned to wait until the princess had left and then slip away to his quarters for some much-needed sleep. He did not want to be interviewed or photographed or turned into some kind of celebrity. But the princess had other plans. A messenger came for him with a summons. Princess Sirith was calling a formal gathering before she left the ship. All crew members were required to attend, and Daniel Cole was to stand at the front. He tried to refuse. He told the messenger that he was not important, that he was just a worker, that they were better people to honor. The messenger listened politely and then said that the princess had expected this response. Her exact words were, "Tell him that if he does not come willingly, I will send my guards to carry him." Daniel went willingly. The gathering was held in the ship's main hall, a large room that was usually used for diplomatic meetings. Every member of the crew was there, standing in neat rows along the walls. On one side stood the humans. On the other side stood the Volanti guards and servants who had traveled with the princess. Daniel walked between them, feeling every eye on his back. He was still wearing his work clothes. There had been no time to change, and honestly, he did not own anything better. His hands were clean, at least. He had washed them 3 times before leaving the engine room. Princess Sirith stood at the far end of the room on a raised platform. She glowed with blue light, brighter than he had ever seen her. Behind her hung the banners of the Volanti royal house, ancient symbols that represented thousands of years of history and power. Daniel stopped at the base of the platform and waited. He did not know what to do with his hands, so he kept them at his sides. The room fell silent. "I have ruled beside my mother for 300 years, Sirith began. Her voice filled the hall, carrying subtle harmonics that made every word seem important. In that time, I have met warriors who could destroy armies, diplomats who could reshape governments, scientists who could unlock the secrets of the universe. I thought I understood power. I thought I knew what it meant to be strong." She paused and looked directly at Daniel. I was wrong. The room was completely still. No one moved. No one breathed. True power is not found in weapons or wealth or political influence, the princess continued. True power lies in understanding, in seeing how pieces fit together, in knowing what others overlook, in building what others cannot imagine. She stepped down from the platform and walked toward Daniel. Her guards moved to follow her, but she held up a hand to stop them. She crossed the distance alone until she stood directly in front of the human maintenance worker. "Daniel Cole," she said, "you asked for nothing. You expected nothing. You worked in shadows while others sought glory. And when death came for us all, you were the one who stopped it. Not with violence, not with wealth, with knowledge and courage, and a quiet determination that I have never seen in any being of any species." She did something then that made every Volante in the room gasp in shock. She bowed Dodd. It was not a small bow, like the one she had given him in her chambers. This was a deep bow, the kind that Volante royalty reserved for beings they considered their equals. It was the highest honor her people knew how to give. When she straightened, her eyes were bright with emotion. "I do not ask you to accept titles or honors," she said. "I know you do not seek such things. Instead, I offer something else, recognition. Let it be known throughout the concordance that humanity is not a young species stumbling among the stars. They are something far more remarkable." She turned to address the entire room, humans and Volante alike. "They are survivors," she said. "The builders, problem solvers who achieve the impossible because no one ever told them it could not be done. For millions of years, they struggled on a single world with no natural weapons, no armor, no advantages. And yet they survived. They learned. They grew. They reached for the stars and found their way to our doorstep." Her voice grew stronger. "We looked at them and saw children. We were fools. What we should have seen were teachers, because they know something that we have forgotten in all our thousands of years of advancement. They know that true strength does not come from power or technology or ancient bloodlines. True strength comes from never giving up, from facing impossible odds and finding a way forward anyway, from working together quietly and patiently, until the impossible becomes possible." She looked at Daniel one last time. When historians write of this voyage, they will not focus on the princess who traveled in safety. They will remember the engineer who worked in shadows, the man who asked for nothing and received nothing, yet saved us all. They will remember what humanity truly is. The room erupted in applause. Humans and Volante together, clapping and cheering for the quiet man in the warm uniform. It was a sound that Daniel had never heard before. A sound of respect and admiration, and something very close to love. He did not know how to respond to it. He had never wanted this. He had only wanted to do his job. When the applause finally died down, Captain Bennett approached him. Her eyes were wet with tears she was trying not to show. "You could have told us," she said quietly, "about what you could do, about what you knew." Daniel smiled. It was the same tired smile he had worn for 6 years. "You never asked," he said. "Besides, I like fixing things. It is honest work." He looked around the room one more time. The humans were standing a little straighter now. The Volante were looking at them differently. Something had changed. Something that could never be changed back. "I should get back to the engine room," Daniel said. "There is a small fluctuation in the secondary power grid that has been bothering me. Royalty or not, someone has to keep the ship running." He nodded to the captain, nodded to the princess, and then turned and walked away. Behind him, human and Volante alike watched him go. And for the first time in 30 years of contact between their species, they saw each other clearly. Humans were not a young species waiting to mature. They were not children learning from their elders. They were exactly what they had always been: quiet, persistent, endlessly adaptable, and far more capable than anyone had ever imagined. It just took an ordinary maintenance worker to remind the galaxy of that truth. Daniel walked through the corridors of the ship, past crew members who now looked at him with wonder and respect. He nodded to them politely, but he did not stop. He had work to do. That was the thing about humans, he thought. They always had work to do. There was always another problem to solve, another system to fix, another impossible challenge to overcome, and that was why they would always survive. That was why they would always find a way. He reached the engine room and picked up his tools. The power grid was waiting for him. It was a small problem, really. Nothing important, but that was how humans built their strength. One small problem at a time. One quiet victory after another. Until even the mightiest empires learned to respect them. Daniel smiled to himself and got back to work. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And somewhere in the stars, millions of other quiet workers, other invisible heroes, other ordinary people with extraordinary hearts, continued to do what they had always done. They kept the universe running, one repair at a time,